Dear Tom Homan and Fox Business and Americans, Tom Homan and Fox Business, you guys have collusion slash S with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, and with terrorists, and with the World Trade Center, with mixed natures of organized crimes through how they have roles with organized crime methods, with a method slash S to be proper. Because, for example, of that which was northern colonies and southern colonies, entrenched, and then America's founders were born. But they have replaced what our founders communicated about that, including how and why. They communicated for us to understand why and how. The only founder's name we know specifically who was our founder was James Madison, and they were all forced to use his plan, including George Washington. And that plan was to counter extort at key locations inside of more than 13 colonies already entrenched. We know with crazy use slash S of every human difference, even Native difference, even Native American against the Native American, because they're forced tactically. There were suburbs designed before America's founders were born. And internationally monitored conversations, time collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists. When did that stop? And why is there a witch trials place next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum? And with other communicated about that place than our founders communicated for us to have communicated about that. Why is that in place? CT, Connecticut, must be the cherry tree, not oak nor peach. Free speech. In other words, Connecticut's Channel 3 News, WFSB, they attach me to big conversations with themselves and with others through administrations, with people and with collusions with them before and after the World Trade Center attack. Long term, too. Conjunctions to the difference of guilt there or as the people next to them. And these are people increasingly involved interstates and internationally, not legitimately with the international, the FBI and other intelligence agencies and their campuses and roles with adults and kids associated with Central Connecticut State University since I was a kid. Intercities of Connecticut with people also interstates and international. There are also with groups like the UN has roles with all kinds of people involved with forensics racketeering. With they never all identities of difference like tied to databases. They are hyper additional collusion slash S with the breaching methods use of databases originally and still as a predicate acts with facts method singular, and all were forced roles with that. Nature itself shows us this, and our founders declassified to have us communicate for themselves. We know nature itself shows us that some of our founders were Native Americans. We don't know their names, but we know that. In other words, it wasn't George Washington didn't have means to counter those internationally monitored conversations. Those and their method of having slavery entrenched sickly distinctly northern colonies and southern colonies, and those internationally companies, the private criminal enterprises, even the natures of industries, even the natures of positive criminal insidiousness natures, of positive treatment syntactically that were engineered, propagated to self-cultivated roles, specifically to keep the identity of relativity to ourselves, of the actually existent breaching method. In other words, people have been pretending things are politics that are not politics. And there's a difference between a leader telling they want loyalty, in other words, and where they're saying don't make convictions and assume that other things that we're not. In other words, the leaders are forced to entertain locations, areas, and states. Bullying logic, principles treatments that are semi-natures of principle treatments as systems tactile from the one that uses what is true always and what is itself and what is only variably itself and it as ourselves. It is showing us as ourselves We are it as we are not it, but in other words, where there are other species bodies of individual bodies, we didn't invent that. We didn't invent how we are that. All exceptions in exception nature come with demonstration slash S of the same thing. How there is one identity of value slash value progression per science that we need to name, knowing too that when we name something, like all the parts of speech, we're speaking about the invisible but still discernible. But this nature shows us there is also a hyper invisible but still discernible, slash hyper invisible but still discernible. And there are parts of itself that come with itself, where and how we could actually, like that one identity of value progression. That is not our species bodies, it's not the other species bodies, but is all things anyway. It's showing us all these different distinct species bodies have two eyes. It's showing us there are exceptions, there is exception nature. But to our short words with this, not by accident, we are forbid free speech. We can't have a system over here, but that's just the way things are. And when you look, the only reason they're that way is because of the rules with each campus we went to, putting fake things in there. And the difference of the guilt of the federal or the right is right where they are the only means to help too, at where the difference is sometimes the guilt of the states. And this is constantly a whole bunch of things in relative to relativity slash hyper relativity, but also to the relativity slash hyper relativity of that breaching method, which had slavery entrenched torture method against every single person, including our founders, if we pay attention, fact, human nature wise, therefore physically. And those questions and answers for us were designed to measure and maintain an extent of collusion slash S, everyone against themselves and others syntactically to an extent slash S. Otherwise, that body was sensed and it was adapted to, including if that body was a majority of people, including if it was everybody. It's still that way because everyone is grouped differences and our individual voicings and are the voicings for humanity, the species body. Now, as systems tax military from its own, pretending it's debatable that the abridgments original have been are not stayed. You guys are right to in other words, there are negatives on New York City, but it's not because the people aren't trying to get jobs or because they aren't trying to get jobs. In other words, think about that. Look at the people, Mr. Homan, in New York City behind those people like YouTubers, people in the rap videos, those big buildings. They can't even all come outside at the same time. In other words, in nature, in other words, so WFSB has timed collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence to Corrupt Organizations Act, being and having been recorded as. Forgiveness is important because this is not to make blame. They're needing to pretend they perceive blame when their names are brought up, to keep and stay treatments of the predicate acts not paid attention to. See, predicate acts with facts method slash S roles were originally and are still facilitated. That as what most furthers and further overt criminal enterprises, private ones, originally and still, and terrorists, time collusions with the interbranch. In other words, all needing, for example, to keep blame the other things, others ourselves. What our founders and what nature showed the colonists, everyone was non-distinctly hurt by a human fact, human nature breaching method. Nature was showing that. And then our founders left communications for us about that. And they forced everyone else to take counter positions to that which was forced and left entrenched from off campuses of all ages and natures. But then further hyper additional collusion slash S there that never went away. In many pray. Vaccines, this breaching method knew that it could get everyone to make confessions to itself. And then further relative to how it uses databases, identity of relativity / relativities to ourselves since before computers. The republic for which we stand, its campuses system, and its necessary function / S by pantheism to see through and make sure it's being not led by the invisible but still discernible, has its own name, the ism, to see through its own ism. Only things that are true always, not denying the slight sequence, and true relative to nature's uses of our question. Every day, courts are only capable of using confessions in New York City in the form of statements to the people, to the kids and adults who go before the courts, for example, or who interact with their police. Of course, we have nature shows us distinctly, though. You guys are showing us other, and you're pretending it's an attack on you guys. When we show how the branches' names are valued, the police forms. Those differences, even their differences individually grouped and together, that's used remotely through themselves, though, and or through ourselves, otherwise that we are sensed, including if we are a body as a majority of people, sensing and countering syntactically properly all the list of impositions. Like there is no excuse at all legitimate for why and how at this point in time what our founders communicated about how the breaching method reassigned what black people's whites of eyes communicates, and simultaneously pretending other roles and or sensing for the breaching method roles. And nature itself was showing us, and is showing us that. And if we look back, what's actually recorded, the difference of federal or of state guilt, that was his self-valued use, where and how they're making treatments of things. For example, overt criminal enterprise, private ones, terrorists, the names of family departments, fire departments, family members, run into high line progressions to be all sides of issues, so where they use truths for life, fake transcripts, on top of how they just totally fake transcripts. Former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, has roles through wars, for example, with the other countries involved. Why should, and these are people involved with the state corrections office and the state judicial branch offices with predicate acts against kids, child abusers, leaders of kids, first force, recorded roles then and now at the same time, as ones at the same time with the news that put fake conversations with me, with them and others. And Wethersfield police faked conversations with me when I was a kid and I was an adult. They have some family members and people named Mendez involved with that, with the Saudi attackers too. Increasingly with people named Scalora involved with cousins, and other cousins with like a Phil Collo is involved on my street with police making confessions over the phone too, and because they're trying to cover up. I caught them faking conversations with me, and even ties to me as a kid at the police station wasn't all, and as an adult. And one time when I did get arrested there, in other words, they took me out of a class as the teacher, and it was a Congressman Larson's family members. I don't even know what's reportedly, in other words, and there was two other kids, Anthony Yagman. Someone just put in a comment too with the name Berger. I don't know. I never seen him. I don't know if it's the same person, because there's someone with a Berger Yagman and Anthony Yagman who have roles with foreign and domestic, military and medical, and Wethersfield police and Harvard Hospital with sexual and medical offenders of kids, putting fake transcripts in databases. And they have roles of my algebra teacher in that arrest of me. But I never had a word of conversation. They just put my fingerprints, and I never had conversations with them at the Wethersfield police station. They pretended with the WFSB, and the kids who did go down there and speak with them, they have roles with intelligence families next to the campuses, being and having been influenced to put fake ties, fake natures of ties to others where they have readings of laws, precedents of statutes, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, because they had time collusions with other countries in the news. And I wrote about this before, including about the drones before the war. I put right in the counter script. Central Connecticut State University has rules with child abusers from other campuses because of their roles with uses of identities of difference. In other words, all kinds of predicate acts and organized crimes with psychiatry, while their tactically delusions wrought, at the same time replacing for criminal foreign influence motivations and methods and needs and natures used. They won't even identify themselves legitimately. So there are more people involved with overt criminal enterprises, private ones at the same time. These are names of all sides of criminal and civil cases. Their family members, their sources, their lawyers, their ties, conjunctions to them, their campuses. The same thing with the courts, the same thing with the police force, same thing with the political, same thing with the corrections and judicial branch offices, time collusions, even with names next to body dumping spots and the difference of their guilt. That sounds complicated. It's not complicated. There's a breaching method that is increasingly using and having used. How it gets all sides of cases in the interbranch form of law and private law, everyone in the news, same time, same sequence shifts, same collusion /S predicate acts with facts method /S roles with as the value of their logic, nature of logic. In other words, they're refusing to identify themselves legitimately into branch. A bunch of people within the British Superior Court and people associated with the Connecticut District Court and Hartford courts before and after the World Trade Center attack. They have been planting evidences in collusions with various natures of crime scenes. And then they're trying to cover this up with the rest of me after the World Trade Center attack. All truths about what happens at crime scenes are what they label as crime scenes. They're using to cover up how they recorded themselves being and having been used. Collusion /S with other foreign bodies, but also the hyperforeign, were all natures of investigators, where I use remotely criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, and their difference with readings of statutes and precedents by lawyers associated with retired Wethersfield police chiefs, involved with these Mendez police and the ones involved with fake conversations with me, with people on my street area and conjunctive to them. And it's nothing personal against them. They'll tell you this. See, these start fights between people since I was a kid. And increasingly, these are people associated with unions, and the difference of the guilt of the people at the unions or next to them, and where it's exploited also at other locations like Central Connecticut State University. And all those things have ties to the same house /S with all these people from other areas that were involved planting evidences intercities on off Trinity College and next to it, and on Central Connecticut State University next to it, and then on my street at the same time. So they could cover up life progressions by pretending they don't understand people. When they say, get me off the fake conversations, for example, with the courts and with the police and with the news at the same time, and get the people with the threats and the violence on paper. And I want a response for their confessions about the principal child abuser. And there are more people and places associated with a Mike Levine and people all along Route 3 and conjunctions to that involved further with town lines and confessions. I never had a word of conversation with Mike Levine. He's increasingly involved with the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, involved with child abusers, leaders of kids, overt criminal enterprises and private ones, per the people tied to him, and per the demonstrations of the interbranch and their sources at the same time, outside the criminal and civil cases, interstates. These are also names who colluded at the World Trade Center and spots next to it, including a court next to it, where the court had a collusion with a sequence shift and other things before and after that, with names on all sides of it, of that case, of a case that was in it too, as ones involved now too, intercities, and before and after the World Trade Center attack. The same way in Connecticut, and the same names are involved with Washington, D.C., with 2 speech class teachers I have, involved with all kinds of natures of organized crimes associated with psychiatry too. I never had a personal conversation at all with the speech class teacher who had me stay back. And the second time I was in that class, increasingly they're involved with people with the state corrections offices and judicial branch offices, increasingly involved with organized crime acts on my street, with people involved with the Wethersfield police, and that they involve planting evidences, fake ties, fake natures of ties to me. In other words, get them on paper, one name and sequence, please. Then we move to C's as one, but not alone. Each species, body, trade, who play this game. It only feels like game /S or else we sense. Please, Mr. Homan. So they have the borders, countries, and they have the people that live at those states involved with timed cover-ups of their collusion /S intercities with the colleges where differences, racketeering, worse than war crimes, how they get away with you interbranch family members, no matter who becomes that, because of the method at each campus, their sense and sensibilities, this method, the pretending, oh, I believe that person's racist. And it's like they're leaving out the breaching method too. Every time most racism is brought up, the breaching method forced everyone to be racist and to have, in other words, so because the breaching method is racist as the race, as all sides, as its roles inter and intracultural, to keep other things, others, ourselves blamed for its roles, with making its sides grouped taxabilitarian from the species and forcing that entertained with syntax. We could peer right through individually grouped and together, a bunch of fakes pretending other as collusion /S. They wanted to hide lipoaggressions at Harvard Hospital, putting fake transcripts there, changing digital evidences with Whiting forensics in Middletown, Connecticut. Increasingly, people tied to this biblical law involved on my street with predicate acts below work criminal enterprises and private ones, and various probate court judges, because probate court judges are sick with delusions too that are evidence, Mr. Homan. And they have them in you guys. And I could heal you guys. I'm not even a doctor. You got to get them on paper, one name in sequence. Get me off the fake conversation with this Leahy family. Rick Sam Paglione sought me out to record, confess, demonstrate, confirm. A Leahy family is involved with him with various natures of federal crimes and child abuse, identity theft, fraud, slanders, sequence shifts, with prosecutors, judges, and people foreign and domestic involved with corners of the street on High Crest and Hangdog Lane, and with an O'Brien family in the past, and then timed years later, and then has something to do with their roles with Wethersfield Shopping Center, and with all kinds of medical corruption, and the judges and the prosecutors and their family members involved with all kinds of identity theft, fraud, slanders, and rules with use of /S of all natures of investigation, investigators in their campuses, and differences of guilt roles used by the breaching method, increasingly involved with everyone's motivations too, and everyone wants to speak about motivations. Our founders communicated for us to understand about how the breaching method has rules with your motivations, leaving out what our founders and what nature itself communicates about how the breaching method reassigned, what nature communicates with Black people's whites of eyes, and what nature communicates by how nature's complete identity will only be itself some ways as criminal insidiousness nature, for how it is constantly communicating, showing us things better than communications, what it is, even though it doesn't use its words. And it does if we pay attention to the communication, because then we make those words, because it's about hyper-additional nature. But you guys have hyper-additional nature as criminal insidiousness nature, the positive and negative treatments and negative treatments to keep from our discernment the identity of value /value progression of the breaching method, replaced right from the communications of our founders, even though it's declassified. The experts on the sciences are using the expertise to get over on people. They also don't realize. Then they want to say use words like ego or speak motivations. These are psychiatry's criminally pointable tactical delusions, raw premises treatments, or these things would have been revealed. We're supposed to be honest, and you're supposed to allow people to be honest about the extortion of George Washington. This is also why I bring up the delusions that are relative here. There are finite ones, grouped ones, and simultaneous ones that are simultaneously relative. This is not like debating about, oh, they're delusional. This you think that about this country and that. In other words, this is about the actual delusions. I'm not even a doctor. I'll delineate the delusions from their criminally formed influence, factor, nature, quality, aspects, and nature, and with the counters to things as collusions, with types of. They have people that run the child agencies that are supposed to account for those things recorded how kept criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, raw time collusion / S with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, not the way they're pretending with the military, like tied to a Mark Violet, a Ray Cololo, a Joe DeMauro. In other words, Eric Jensen, right through wars. These we don't have a side at A through Z. Make sure you guys get them on paper with the Wethersfield police, with these Mendez police, and the other ones like this Dillon family and they fake with the news too. They had conversations with me when I was a kid and as an adult. These Mendez police also next to Fox Connecticut News in Hartford with a bunch of people, and at New Britain Superior Court involved further with sexual medical offenders of kids, digital crimes, wire crimes, interfaith conversation with me at the Wethersfield Police Department. Please know how they have cultural, intercultural, and intercultural identity theft, fraud, slanders, black pupils. Period. Get them on paper, one name and sequence. Here, I tell vaccines.